Welcome to another video, West Coast fans. We're going to be covering all things West Coast with the list and what they could be doing in the 2025 draft. I'm going to go over, I don't want to linger too much on things like the pick three trade and things that happened last year, but we're going to have a look at the entire playing list. Obviously, the things that are going wrong a little bit on the field right at this point, because that's obviously fairly dire for West Coast fans at the moment, but also the picks that West Coast could possibly have, because you've got things like the Oscar Allen situation, the compensation around that, and then where that might leave West Coast based on where we think they're going to finish on the ladder and which players they're going to be looking to pick in the draft. So I've kind of grouped up the playing list into different sort of sections. Some players I'm not even going to mention in this because they're either older and probably don't look like they're going to be a part of the next premiership team. I've got the players that should be a part of that next premiership team if they do stay at the club, some of the players you've recruited recently, and then kind of the players you've recently drafted that we don't really know if they're going to be sort of bankable, quote unquote. I don't really know what else to call these sorts of players, but players that you would assume are kind of, best in their position or one of the better players in the competition in their position that could kind of lead you towards the next successful period for the club. I think naturally the first player to bring up here on the list for West Coast is Harley Reid. If they can get his signature for the long term, that will be massive for West Coast Eagles on the field. I know that his performances right now aren't particularly good, but we saw what he did in his first year, which was phenomenal. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that from a first-year player to do those sorts of things. Like we've seen it from a Nick Dacos as far as accumulation and ball skills and sort of outside work, but we haven't seen somebody go into the midfield and have that sort of an impact. And the type of player that Harley Reid is, that sort of hard ball dominant, big-bodied mid that has that explosiveness to get out the front of the stoppage, to pretty much bully bigger bodied players around him at stoppages and then kick goals and those sorts of things. Those players don't grow on trees. So West Coast have a really important piece of this next generation of West Coast sort of success. They have that in Harley Reid, and it'll be massive if they can get his signature. He's the first one there. Liam Baker, I'm going to bring up here. It's interesting because Liam Baker, he's around 25, 26 years old. So he's probably, when West Coast do have their next push at success, it's likely that Liam Baker will probably be an over 30 player at that point. He's probably someone that's going to be on the periphery. Yes, he does come and help them on field right now, and he's one of their better players right now, but I'm not sure where he fits into the next sort of team. I have put him down just because he is one of their better players, and he's still young enough that you're not kind of retiring like someone like a Dom Sheed or an Elliot Yeo who are a little bit older. So I've got him there. Oscar Allen, I have him as part of this, but mainly just because, it does look like he's going to go, doesn't it? It does look like the best thing for West Coast, the best thing for Oscar Allen is he comes to Victoria, joins a big Victorian team, and then West Coast get the compensation for him in the draft, which they can put into parts of the team that they really, really need. We're going to talk about that later in the video with the midfield. But I think that would just be the best thing for everyone. And it would sort of, in some ways, alleviate the pressure of what happened last year with trading away pick 3. They'd be able to get back into the draft in a meaningful way at the top end and take some really high-quality midfielders there. I've got Tyrell Dewar in this list. I think what I've seen of him this season has been really exceptional as a sort of high half-forward type player, someone that has elite-level skills, uses the ball really well, and if, we're clutching at straws a little bit here with the list at the moment because there's not a lot of really A-grade players. I wouldn't call Tyrell Dewar an A-grade player, but he's someone that has the trajectory to go to that next level, so I've got him there. The last one I've got there is Jake Waterman, who's 26 years of age, so similar to Liam Baker. Is he going to actually be there or playing his best football when the next premiership tilt sort of comes around? It's hard to say, but he's still a top-level player at his best and was an All-Australian last year, so we have to consider that. And what I've done here for West Coast is I've made a sort of sub-category because it's hard to find too many bankable players at the moment just with where the list is at. So in the sort of subcategory of the players that we just probably don't have enough data on, and we're not too sure, you've got players like Bailey Williams in the ruck. He's played some pretty good football this year, so I wanted to include him in this group. Do I think he's a real high-end ruckman with a lot of potential for the future? Maybe not. I think if you're playing Bailey Williams as R1, you're probably giving something away to the opposition, but at the moment, he is the best available in that position. He's doing all right. Harry Edwards, I had big raps for him in the preseason. He's had a pretty slow, poor start to the season. He's been dropped from the team even, but I think he still does have that potential, and he's at 200 centimeters to have a player of that age, early 20s. I think he's really valuable still for the future. Noah Long's a small forward who I've liked what I've seen from him this season. Brady Hoff does a really good job as that sort of medium lockdown defender. I've discussed him a lot with West Coast videos. Jack Hutchinson is a player I think has a lot of potential. Ryan Marich is another one with a lot of potential. I think he's gone to half back and he uses the ball really well and he's a nice size. But as I read off all of these names, I go through Bo Allen, Tom Gross, Job Shanahan, Luca Grego, Hamish Davis, who they picked up in the 2024 draft. A lot of these guys, apart from the 2024 draftees I mentioned off the back end, they're sort of periphery players in the sense that they're not down the spine of the team. They're not, center bounce midfielders that are really helping you win that contested footy in the middle of the ground. They're not key position players. So they're kind of in between players at the moment. And that seems to be where West Coast's talent is lying. They don't seem to have those fundamental players that are really going to keep you in matches and get you wins for the now. It is interesting with players such as Ruben Ginby and Elijah Hewitt, who were taken a couple of years ago. I don't think their progression has been as good as West Coast would have hoped for. I still have some pretty high hopes of Elijah Hewitt as a powerful sort of midfielder, but at the moment, he's not really looking like a bankable player that you can trust and rely on, particularly with his body issues. On top of that, you've still got some players on the list that are playing at the moment that probably are in their 30s and don't really feel like they're at the level of AFL. I look at guys like Jaden Hunt, Cripps, Duggan, even Campbell Chesser, these kind of guys that Campbell Chesser probably one that hasn't been in the team long term, but some of these guys, I know they're there filling up a position, but I don't think they'd be on many other AFL teams' lists at the moment. And I think that speaks to a wider issue with this entire list management at West Coast. I'm not trying to retire these guys either, but they're probably, if you compare them against other teams in the bottom 4, 5, 6 players and the more experienced players, there's obviously a lot of better leadership at other clubs. So where does that actually leave West Coast and what they can sort of do for the future? Well, I think missing players this season like Elliot Yeo, who's just that presence at centre bounce. He's good for leadership for those younger players. We saw how much Harley Reid flourished under his sort of stewardship in the centre of the ground last year. I think he could bring that to new and upcoming midfielders that are playing in there at the moment. I think Harley Reid, of course, does need to get back into that midfield so they have a bit more of a physical presence around the ball. I don't think there's much use playing players like Liam Duggan in there. You're sort of just wasting an opportunity that you could give to a younger player, and he's not really using the ball and giving you much control in games anyway. I think this game style that they're playing is a little bit too direct in some ways. They give the ball away quite easily, and they aren't able to sort of, I guess, get that in-game understanding of just sort of flicking the ball around, getting some control of the football, and then stopping teams scoring from actually having some possession as well. We all heard the stat this week about West Coast's contested possession number. That's largely because they don't have any loose ball dominant midfielders, those little guys that get in there and they accumulate the football. That's largely at the moment being left up to a player like Clay Hall, who leads the club for loose ball gets this season. So it's all down to young players. You're looking at Clay Hall, you're looking a little bit at Liam Baker, and you're looking at players like Tom Gross who are running through the midfield at the moment. And I like some of those players, but to have those guys as your top loose ball players, your top midfielders, if you look at other clubs that are struggling at the moment, your Richmonds, your North Melbournes, they've got a much better midfield in there at the moment. So if you go back a year, I don't want to harp on things that West Coast fans and West Coast can't change at the moment, but you go back to last season, the fact that they gave that pick 3 away when they could have taken a high-grade midfielder at the top end of the draft. I think that was a poor call given where this team is at and where someone like Liam Baker, what he actually brings. I think he's more of an icing on the cake than someone that fixes the problems for them at the moment. Not to say that any of this is his fault. He's playing pretty good football and looks to be one of the players that's a big presence for them at the moment. But you got to think long term. But there are some big opportunities here. And I want to discuss the 2025 draft and what West Coast can do from a list management point of view. So where are West Coast going to finish on the ladder so we can roughly predict their draft capital? I think it's safe to say they're either going to finish bottom or second bottom. Richmond could tire as the season goes on, and I do expect West Coast to improve a little bit and pick up some wins, particularly if they get some of those players back, like Elliot Yeo that we talked about. They can get Harley Reid up and firing in the second half of the season. They are going to be dangerous. But let's just say, for the purpose of this video and for hypotheticals, that they do finish bottom and get that pick 1. Their draft hand at that point would be pick 1, and as it currently stands, they would have pick 14 as well in the first round of that draft, which was tied to Hawthorn, I believe, from a trade that they did last year in that deal. And let's also just say, for the purpose of doing this pretty early in the season, let's be honest, that Oscar Allen walks out the door, all parties are happy, they shake hands, and the AFL gives West Coast, who desperately need it at the moment, a second pick. The top end compensation for Allen would be the next pick in the draft, which for North Melbourne a couple of years ago was pick 2 and 3. That would make this one pick 1 and 2 for West Coast if they were to finish last on the ladder. I think something that West Coast would be looking at doing here is doing a deal with Gold Coast, who will be trying to bank as many points as they possibly can to get their academy selections locked away. I'm talking about Addensul, Ewland. There's a couple of others as well in there. So Gold Coast are going to want to trade off their early picks. The top pick that they have in the draft at the moment is tied to Port Adelaide, which is pick 8. West Coast could be trying to get their hands on that pick. I think if they could trade off, perhaps pick 14, pick 19 that they currently have if they finish on the bottom of the ladder, that could get them up to pick 8, and then they would hold picks 1, pick 2, and pick 8 in the 25 national draft. With all those deals being done, and of course I'm speculating a lot here, but West Coast would really control the top end of the draft and be able to speculate a little bit in the draft with the picks that they make and give them a little bit more flexibility. The other team up the top end there would be Richmond. They could sort of, get in each other's heads a little bit, figure out who each other wants and sort of find the best situation for both teams. Now, the players up the top end of this draft, you're talking about Cooper Duff Tytler, who is the, potentially generational ruckman at 200 centimeters, basketball background, moves really well, kicks the footy really well for a player his size. Now, West Coast don't really have a top grade ruckman on the list at the moment. So getting someone like Duff Tytler would be massive. Now, would that give you the sugar hit that you need in the midfield right now? No. But with having the second pick there, if you did get rid of Oscar Allen, you got pick 2 and pick 8, it would give you a little bit more room to speculate on a player like this. You think about, for West Coast fans, what a player like Nick Naitanui did when they took him at pick 2 in the draft. Cooper Duff Tytler could have this transformative effect on the Eagles. Then at pick 2, you do get to open up a little bit. You've got a Willem Dersma sitting there who, again, looks like a generational sort of utility type player. If he can go into the midfield, he probably stands as that obvious pick number 2 player. But is he really what West Coast need right now? He hasn't shown a major accumulation factor from the midfield yet, other than that round 1 game earlier this season. He could show that as the season goes on and make himself undeniable for West Coast. But the players that I would be sniffing around here for with picks 2 and 8, I'm talking about Josh Lindsay from the Geelong Falcons. He is a metronomic accumulating player, plays across the half back line, but has been playing in the midfield for Geelong. 27 disposals last week. He uses the footy brilliantly, and he's just a player at the moment that West Coast don't have. Someone that can go into the midfield, rack up big numbers, and just control the football, because I don't think West Coast have any control over games at the moment. The other one is Sam Grill from the Oakley Chargers. He has played halfback as well. He's a little bit more run and gun style, so he's less of an accumulator and a little bit more impact per possession, but he still does rack up the football. He hits the scoreboard, and he's a very dynamic. And I see him probably, his long-term development, becoming somebody like a Josh Kelly at the GWS Giants, someone that does have that accumulation factor, has that run, and just creates overloads on the opposition. Again, I think West Coast's list build is largely around power, and they don't have a lot of those players that just have the nous around stoppage and the nous to be able to rack up the footy. Both Grill and Lindsay, they probably don't sound as sexy as someone like a Harley Reid who has that explosive power. But for what West Coast need right now, they almost need to be able to defend the game by winning the ball, because that's the biggest problem at the moment, just getting their hands on the football. These guys, that is their one wood. They're often in drafts a little bit easier to find, these types of players that do just rack up big numbers, but it's ultimately what West Coast need right now, and they need some A-graders, players that can do that and use the ball really well, which is what both of these guys do. You then start to look at that midfield sort of holistically as you've been developing it over the last couple of drafts in this rebuild. You're looking at Harley Reid as your real power merchant in there. You're looking at Tom Gross as a bit of a hard-nosed accumulator, somebody that probably down the track can play some defensive roles on players, and he hits the scoreboard in the forward half as well. Then you've got a Josh Lindsay in there, someone that just moves really well. It's just a sort of, a cerebral type A-grade midfielder that picks up the footy. And Sam Grilich in there with a little bit of extra pace, that run, can play inside out like a Josh Kelly, like I mentioned, and just give your midfield a really nice balance overall. On top of that, you've got your Bo Allens, your Luca Gregos, your other young players to come through there. And I think in the long term, Bo Allen can really turn himself into a dynamic midfielder as well to go along with the power of Harley Reid. Furthermore, with the Oscar Allen thing, if Oscar Allen was to walk out the door, you did draft Job Shanahan, one of the better key forwards in the draft last year, and you'd be able to groom him at the lower level and sort of bring him in later in this rebuild as well. Now, on top of all of that, I do think West Coast could look to the mid-season draft to try to find somebody that's playing lower level footy at the moment that can just pick up the football, be a bit of a bigger bodied presence in that midfield just to take some of the heat off some of these younger guys. That would give you the flexibility to play players like Liam Baker off the half back. Jack Graham is probably more of just a defensive mid. They probably just need to get some other bodies in there while Elliot Yeo is out of the team. And let's be honest, Elliot Yeo, he does have a lot of problems with his body. So his availability is not always going to be a sure thing. Let me know what you think about this video, guys, and who you want to see West Coast take in the draft. And I'll see you guys in the next one.